Hi, this is Chris from IELTS 360. In this video, we will review the questions of Test 2, Passage 2 from Cambridge IELTS 10. Please have a copy of the passage in front of you as we proceed. The first thing you should do when looking at a passage is figure out what it's about. And for that, we should start looking at the title. The title here is clear, but it's without a subtitle. So what does gifted children mean? If we don't know, it will probably be mentioned in the first paragraph, which I've placed down below. Now here we can see in its first two sentences that the word gifted children is in reference to top-level students as recorded from an intelligence test. So how we teach these students is going to be the topic of the passage. So the next thing we need to do is look at the question types. We can see that the first four questions are information in the paragraph type question. This is one of my least favorites, and I'll talk about more about it later. Now, the next thing we get is matching people's names to statements. I find these can generally be easy to scan for. And then the final type that we have is complete the sentences below, which, considering there's only 4 of these here, might be trickier to find than we normally would suspect. So let's start with the first question types. Which paragraph contains the following information? So the first thing we want to note here is that it says you can use any letter more than once. So that's going to mean that we might end up using the same paragraph for more than one of the questions. Now, considering there's 4 questions and 7 paragraphs to choose from, that means that we could very easily see that there will be less than 50% of the paragraphs actually used to answer these questions. That means that it could be quite hard to find these because if you think about it, that's half of the paragraphs that might just have nothing that I need to answer these questions. And I also, because I know that these paragraph questions don't come in order, that would make them a bit too easy, I might find that the first question doesn't find its answer until the last paragraph in theory. And so I might be spending my whole time just scanning up and down to find these. As a result of that, I usually leave these until last so that the other questions can help me find what I'm looking for. But that doesn't mean I completely ignore them when I start. What I do is I highlight the scanning words that I'm going to be looking for so that when I am answering the other questions, I can try to pay attention to see whether they come up. So let's take a look at what the scanning words would be for these questions. So the first question, number 14, we see a reference to the influence of domestic backgrounds of gifted children. Domestic background, to me, that's about family, it's about home. That's probably something that's going to be easier to find than influences or a reference won't even be there. Gifted children's what the whole topic is. So that's about the only scanning thing that I can think of. The next one, I would focus here on too much guidance. Are they talking about guiding students? And then is there a discussion of having too much? Remember, this is not going to have a trick in quite the same way as we're used to from like true false and paragraph headings, because there will be something that does discuss too much guidance, though we will expect synonyms. Okay, 16, the words here I'm looking at is damaging and anxiety. Damaging could be clear, though quite a few possibilities of how they might say that. Anxiety, to be honest, there's a lot of unexpected ways we might have a synonym for that, and you might not even know what that word means, making that a very challenging question to look for. Finally, 17. The words, again, I'd highlight here are techniques and socially disadvantaged children. Classroom techniques might be something you can recognize even if they don't use the word. Notice it's saying there's examples of them, so they might be talking about some techniques in a paragraph. So even now, socially disadvantaged, it's maybe not clear what that means. I can think of quite a few ways of saying that. So maybe I can find it, maybe I can't. Again, I think this is a challenging question and why I'd leave these questions until last. Okay, let's look at the next questions, where we're trying to match the statements with the correct person or people. They say people because one of the choices has more than one name attached to it. Now, the first thing I notice is there's the same number of names as questions. That actually makes things kind of easy because it hasn't told us we need to use we could use one of the answers more than once. I know that it's one question to one answer, and that makes my life a little bit easier. As I'm scanning through the passage, the thing I notice is that these names, as they're listed A through E, do appear in that order through the passage. However, that doesn't mean that the questions are in that order. In fact, the questions will not be completely in that order. So I'm going to scan for the names. What I really do is I flip this. I look for the names. I'm like, who said A? Here is A. What did they say? So I think of the name, which is the letter normally, which is the answer. I think about matching the answer to the question rather than the question to the answer. Remember when you're looking, though, to find the statement being made, it might come before or after the name in the passage. So it might be that blah, blah, blah is what this guy said, or it might be this guy said blah, blah, blah. So let's take a look at each statement and think about, again, what words we might scan for. So for 18, I'm going to highlight less time and accurate work. Again, gifted pupils is too general. Exercises, maybe that'd be useful, but could be said in a lot of different places. But how much time and accuracy of what they do, I think, is probably key. 19, I think I'm going to go with self-reliance and goals. Again, self-reliance is a fairly distinct concept that there's not too many ways of saying it. Goals, there's quite a few more ways of saying it, but they're pretty obvious. All right, 20. Feelings here is, I think, the key word. Assist would be the other one. The idea that they're talking about feelings and emotions of some sort and how that makes learning easier for gifted students. 21. The key here, I think, is close relatives. So are they talking about family, and does that connect? And while I'm thinking about that, wasn't there a mention of something relating to domestic, which family is part of your domestic life, in one of the one of the information questions? I might want to take a note of that as I'm doing this question and when I find its answer. Finally, 22. Successful students have learned considerable amounts about their subject. So how much do they learn about what they are learning about, I think, is going to be the key to finding that question. Right. Final question type is complete the sentences below. Now, the first thing I always want to note is how many words. In this case, it says 2 words. I'm also noting that they're all nouns. Now, that means I need to find a noun word, but because it's 2 words, I could very possibly need to attach an adjective to it in order to complete the space accurately. So I do need to think about that. Remember, that's important because we need to fit the space grammatically with the word. Also think about the plurals, if a plural space will fit, or do I need an article? Is there an article telling me that I need a singular? That can sometimes tell me the difference between the right and the wrong answer. These will come in order through the passage. However, due to the simple fact that there are only 4 questions here, and because the last question set, I can see that the last name is in the end of the passage, that means I have to go back to the beginning to start scanning for this again, which also means that 4 questions are spread out through the whole passage, and that can make them kind of tricky to find. So let's take a look again at what we might scan for in this case. So for 23, my focus here would be IQ, because there's IQ and intelligence are about the only ways we say that. That shouldn't be too hard to find. And then home. Again, home, there's not that many ways we say that. So what is it that's available at home? What are the 2 things? Now also I notice it's space and space. That means I need to write down 2 things. I can write the and, it will accept it as 3 words, but I don't need to. I can simply write the two words independently. And even though they wouldn't be next to each other normally, it would still be okay for this answer. 24, average ability. Now, the reason I think this is useful is because this is a child of average ability. We're not looking at these special children. So what do they say about the other kids, the normal kids? And they need more direction because they don't have something. Now, again, don't have there's a lot of ways of saying that, and that seems to me like that negative twist is something they love to use to find an answer. Okay, 25, metacognition, to me, seems to be the key to that. That's a term that you probably don't know what it means. It doesn't matter what it means. It's a term that has almost no synonyms that I can think of. It's going to be in there. Find it. Find out what they're saying about learning strategies as well as developing something else. So we need another thing beyond the learning strategies that the students develop. Finally, the teachers rely on what is known as something. Now, what is known as is not necessarily the term that I'm looking for, but that's a key to finding it, because what is known as means that this is the name of the kind of thing that we're talking about. This will often be highlighted, might even be separated with some kind of way of saying this is a special name, putting it in quotation marks or something like that. We also see that impressive grades, again, there's quite a few ways of saying that, but that might also help me find it. All right, so those are the questions of the section. This seems like kind of a challenging passage to me. There's a lot of technical language in here. The questions are going top to bottom for all three question types, which just means that we can waste a lot of time searching. That makes our scanning words extra important, and it makes choosing the right questions to start with extra important. Again, this is why I would say save the information in the paragraph questions to last, and let the other ones give you a sense of what's in those paragraphs so that finding those last answers will hopefully be a little bit easier. Other things just to remember, that you pick the ones that you think will be easiest and do those first. That might be the gap fills, it might be the matching, it might even be the information. Each person's a bit different with that. Don't worry about the words you don't know. Think about that word we saw, metacognition. You could ask most native speakers what that means, and they're not going to really be able to give you a definition. It's just a word, find it, and find the answer. Time yourself. Remember, you need to be finishing these in 20 minutes by the time you're doing the test. Now, if this is early in your practice and review process, you might not need to worry about getting it in 20 minutes, but you need to be also concerned if you're taking much more than 20 minutes. If it's over 25, why is it taking so long? How can you try and cut that down? What's taking up your extra time? The last thing to remember when you're doing this is that you won't have my help on your test. These overviews are meant to be a guide for you in the earlier stages of your practice, but I won't be there. You have to be able to do what I'm doing. So think about what I'm doing when I'm making these choices and try to learn to do it yourself with other study material.